Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. Welcome to episode 46 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Dr. Peter Hines back on the show with us today. Peter rightfully was our first guest on the podcast ever. Peter has dedicated his career to researching and writing on how organisations do and can achieve sustainable journeys of excellence. Peter has recently been working on what he calls the people value stream. Today's episode is focused on this new area of work, and I'm looking forward to learning more. Let's get into the episode. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thanks very much, Brad. Nice to be back and nice to see you again.
Yeah, definitely. Really looking forward to this chat today, Peter, on this topic. It's such a key one. Peter, let's get straight into it. Why have you been focusing on the role of people in lean? What's led you down this path?
Well, I suppose that's a fairly long story, but to be reasonably brief on it, I suppose in the early 2000s, I realized that a lot of lean wasn't really creating sustainability in companies. And I started looking at what some of the reasons for that were. And at the end of the day, it was really all people-related things. So technically related things that we can easily teach and replicate seem to work pretty well. But things around the people were not something that you can easily teach. And hence the companies that were succeeding were people who had natural leaders or leaders that had learned how to do this. So hence the reason for the people came at that sort of stage. So I started, I suppose, at that time, and then really focused on this sustainability. And now, increasingly looking at, the flows and people and what we need to do to create this sort of sustainable lean process.
Wow. Okay. So a lot of your research, Peter, led you to this place that the people play such a factor in leadership. What's your view, Peter, on the success or otherwise of human resource management in this piece? So if we're talking people, we're talking a lot about human resource and human resource management. What's your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, well, I think, unfortunately, looking at it from outside, and I'm not, an HR professional, so this might be seen differently if you were an HR professional, is I think the whole HRM thing has largely failed. So if you think about the evolution back in the sort of 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we maybe talked about the personnel department, which was very much seen as a clerical, payroll and industrial relations, things like that. Not from a lean point of view, necessarily very value adding, etc., but necessary or waste, etc. And then we sort of got this HR movement, sort of 70s, 80s, and so forth. And within that, the model that probably about half companies have followed or to some degree followed is the so-called Ulrich stool. And that basically has three elements, three-legged stool. So one is, the back office stuff. So that sort of transactional stuff like payroll and expenses and things like that has to be done. And largely that was automated or outsourced, often to sort of India or places like that. In other words, they went for cheap, and often quite a lot of IT was involved. So quite a lot of money was spent in this area. So that became quite efficient, not necessarily very effective, because often if you had a problem with that, it was almost impossible to solve it, etc. Yeah. And then the other two legs of the stool. So one of those was the sort of strategic role, which was sort of being on the board and advising from a people perspective. And the problem with that one really, I think, didn't work, because the third leg was then the business partners, and the business partners were then sort of working in the business. The problem with that is that resources got sucked away from that and cost cutting, so that the HR couldn't really do the job of supporting the line. And hence what they did is they delegated a lot of the things that HR used to do, the looking after the people, someone in HR to go and chat to the line. The problem is the line didn't really have the skills to do this. They didn't have the time. They didn't see it was their job. Why are we paying HR? So this sort of supporting people, this coaching, this development, this I've got a problem, someone to talk to, fell between the cracks. So the result of that, the other leg, the strategic one, is they didn't really have the credibility. And many HR professionals, unfortunately, don't have a rounding outside of HR. So when they started talking about, turnover, and they started talking about return on investment, they were lost. So hence the credibility of HR went down and down and down, which meant that the strategic role became an almost nothing. So, that might be seeing it in a rather negative way, but fundamentally, I believe the whole HRM thing has not really succeeded, which often means that this whole support for people that we're looking at here has gone backwards, not forwards, during the sort of last 20 or 30 years. So that's my sort of thoughts on that one.
It's insightful, Peter, because I've seen it myself where, people get lost in the crack between, is it the frontline leadership that own that, or is it HR that own that? And each is doing the part of job they can do, but it can get lost. It can be completely broken, can't it, in that regard?
Well, the other thing is that, a personal experience of HR having low credibility is we did some work probably about 12 years ago in Cardiff University, where I was at the time, doing lean inside the university. And we worked with the HR people, the HR department. And what we were trying to do was trying to improve some of their processes. And we were looking at staff recruitment, recruiting a research assistant or something like that. And we found that this typically took sort of 3 to 6 months. It took a huge amount of time,
Wow.
A huge amount of resource. It was very, very inefficient, etc. So we looked at it and we mapped it out. And what we found was there were huge delays, like you would on any sort of mapping. And when we went down and looked at the root cause, we found the root cause wasn't really HR at all. It was basically the people wanting the recruit. And because they had low credibility of HR, they didn't give them the right information. So HR were very inefficient and kept coming back, etc., because they were not really told the spec for the person. So the person wanting the person got more and more frustrated with HR. But the irony was it was actually them that was causing the problem.
Yeah.
So the solution to this was this very simple fix. And we actually used the sort of Amazon, ordering page as the example. And we basically developed a one-page document where the recruiting person had to fill it in. And if they didn't put the details in, and they pressed go, it didn't go. So basically, we forced them to put the data in. Otherwise, it wouldn't go. And hence the clock didn't start clicking. So we managed to get recruitment down below 2 months, simply by doing this very simple IT fix, which got rid of the main root cause, which was partly due to the poor credibility of HR in the first place. Yeah. So that's a rather sort of sanguine and sorry story that where all this sort of stuff led us to, I suppose.
Yeah. But it sounds like a real breakdown between the frontline and HR that, happens in so many organizations. But likewise, how do you see lean has evolved over the last 30 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, lean sort of has evolved in somewhat towards the people side. I mean, we all remember the early days of lean, the 80s, 90s, coming out of TQM and JIT, but very much about tools and techniques and Kanban and 5S. And, we all know the tools and techniques. And then I suppose we saw a bit of a movement in that early 2000s period. So there was a sort of small group of fellow researchers, I suppose, people like Jeff Leiker, Bob Emiliani, etc., who started to sort of put the spotlight more on the people sort of side of things. So that sort of came in, but I suppose most organizations didn't really focus on that. And there was a bit of a movement towards sort of systems, maybe like strategy deployment or continuous improvement system. It's probably only been the last 5 years that people have really started to see lean much more in terms of a culture change. And hence you've seen a number of books and publications thinking about this sort of culture change journey. Unfortunately, a lot of the lean folks don't really still understand much about the people side or the culture side, which is, of course, where some of the skills are sitting in the HR community. Unfortunately, the people in the HR community don't understand in general a lot about lean. So hence there's a sort of mismatch. And not only a mismatch, there's a mismatch of language, because, you go in talking about lean 5S and value stream mapping, and they're talking about Ulrich stools and things, and we can't talk to each other because it doesn't work. So what I found is, even in some of the very best organizations, sort of Shingo winning sites, for example, you go and look at the HR department, for example, and you find they've done great lean work, and you say to them, well, what have you done different than other back office like finance or purchasing or something? And nothing. It's exactly the same. Obviously the metrics are relevant, but the method is the same. And then I asked the question, well, what's your contribution? And they say, well, we've done this and this. And I think, no, I, as an HR person, what's your contribution to this lean? And they sort of look at you completely blank, and hence the penny hasn't dropped that there's a major contribution in terms of some of this skills and competency and knowledge, and it just hasn't gelled at this point.
The two are disconnected. I know we're going to get into the people value stream piece, Peter, because I'm really keen to get your thoughts on the path forward there. But I know you've also included agile in some of your people value stream work. Like, why is this? What's led you to do that also, the agile piece?
A couple of reasons. So one is, I think a lot of the lean community is still struggling a little bit with this sort of people bit, and certainly putting people at the center, etc. And what I found in a few things. So one is thinking about people coming new into the organization, and the sort of Generation X and Zed and or millennials, is their expectations from a job are quite different from perhaps people in their sort of 40s or 50s or whatever. They're expecting much more sort of instant gratification. They're expecting a much more fun environment. They're expecting a sort of blend of work and social. So, they're expecting almost WhatsApp or Facebook or, whatever it is, etc. I'm not even up with the latest, platforms, etc. They're expecting experience to be like that. And the lean community has been really quite slow to adapt to that. Because I think the agile community, possibly because of some of the IT, heritage in there, has been quicker to think about, the needs of the people, to think about moving from the customer experience sort of side that's quite strong in agile to this sort of people experience or employee experience, which is quite similar to this sort of people value stream. I think what the agile community hasn't got is quite some of the knowledge of how to manage a value stream, but they've got a better starting point in terms of the needs of the people. And very much, if you're creating parallel teams instead of the sort of hierarchy that you have in a more traditional organization, there's a heavier reliance on people and teams and self-autonomy and team autonomy, etc. So hence the needs for people and things like psychological safety are much higher in the agile world than they were for the lean world. So I think they realized it sooner, and there's probably a greater need for it in the agile world. So hence, some of the recent work, certainly in Europe, in the agile community, quite a bit in Scandinavia, has been quite strong in this sort of people area.
Yeah, agile's been very strong throughout Scandinavia. And Peter, I also remember, when I was at university in the early 90s, and I studied Toyota production systems, and I remember about half the course was on teamwork. And then you mentioned agile, and so much about agile is about that teamwork bit, isn't it? High performance teams having high team morale.
That's right. Yeah.
Where do you think, Peter, the lean world didn't pick up as rapidly on that teamwork bit, do you think, with it, Peter? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it'd be wrong to say it's not there. I mean, there is a little bit of work, but I think, I suppose because, agile is based around scrums or, Kanban, etc. It's so central to it, and there's much less focus on obviously the hierarchy and management led and etc. Whereas lean, I suppose, came earlier, and hence it borrowed that management led sort of type of approach. And although a lot is talked about bottom up, the focus is probably less on the team and more on the individual. It's more about individuals contributing, probably less of an emphasis on teams than in the agile world. Which I don't think is wrong, but I don't think it's sufficient. I think you need individuals and team. It's not one or the other.
No, well, I'm really keen to get into this people value stream piece, Peter, because I'm keen to get your thoughts on the path forward with this. So, Peter, do you mind explaining for the listeners what is the people value stream?
Well, it's probably best to explain it in terms of a sort of value stream map, because obviously most of the listeners probably be familiar with the classic sort of value stream map. Yeah. So if I explain first of all, the current state, and then we'll explain sort of the future or the ideal state. So the current state is that let's suppose that the customer for people is the team leader or the team themselves, and by implication the business. So if you think of that, the customer is the team leader. And then if you like, the equivalent of production control, if you like, in a value stream map, would be HR. Now, what we have traditionally with HR is we probably have a series of functions or sub-functions within HR. So the people, certainly in larger organizations, so the people that do the recruiting differ from the induction people, who differ from the learning and development, and differ from the reward and recognition, et cetera, et cetera. So what you find is that the functional problem we see in businesses is almost replicated a level down in terms of these sub-functions sitting in HR, which meant when you get the physical flow, and the physical flow here is the individual, the recruit. And so they come in and they get recruited maybe according to their skills or what degree have you got, et cetera, et cetera. And then they get to the induction, and the induction is around values and culture and how it works here. And they're thinking, well, this isn't what I got recruited. It doesn't mix. And then the learning and development, they get taught all sorts of stuff which they end up not using. And then maybe they don't get review at the right time, and et cetera. So what you've got is you've actually, in the current state, you've got the optimization of these sub-functions, which is a bit like the push-based in a value stream map, where you're optimizing the production of each of the different machines, etc. Which means that from the individual, it's a bit like a zigzag journey, that it feels like you're being pulled from pillar to post.
Yeah.
And your line manager's not really looking after you, HR's not really looking after you. And actually, it's all disconnected. And actually, the result of this is that people are not less engaged. They're not sort of in the flow that we might sort of think of, the psychological flow. So they're contributing less. There's less value added. And by implication, they're more likely to leave more quickly. So the end result of this is the individual doesn't get what it wants out of it, and the company doesn't get what it wants out of it. So that's my simple view. Obviously, I'm sort of slightly exaggerating to make to the effect.
But Peter, I've seen it so much. You've got this individual you've hired, and the employee journey starts, and they're really, in many cases, put through a non-customer focused, production flow. Well, there's not much flow. It's like you go from batch to batch to batch.
Yeah.
And the amount of information they can get pushed into them in that normally web-based, sit at a computer, watch the training videos a lot of the time. Can be fairly soul destroying for that new employee who is the customer or the main flow of product for this value stream we're talking about.
Yeah. Just think about the moment of truth type stuff. How many employees have people or listeners, how many employees have you hired, or maybe yourself, that don't even have a desk, a computer, and a phone when they arrive?
Yeah.
What does that say to the individual coming in? What are they going to feel? They're going to feel I made a mistake.
Yeah, that's it.
Etc.
They're already anxious and nervous. Have I made the right choice to start with?
That's right.
Every break and flow in that journey and poor experience in that journey can just amplify that perception.
And hence, we're not really, like in the traditional value stream, we're looking to maximize the vertical areas. Whereas what we should be trying to do is maximize the flow. And in this case, it's the flow is the individual.
Yeah.
So we need to maximize the flow in terms of what is value to the customer. So what does the customer want? So if the customer is the individual line manager or the team leader or the team themselves, so they want things like competencies, they want things like the right behaviors, they want things like the level of engagement, they obviously want the right number of people, and they want people to have good wellness. So that's the sort of thing that we want. So we could think of sort of metrics and so forth in that area. And then if we think about the role of HR, the role of HR is much more as an enabler for this. So quite rightly, the role of managing the people and supporting developing the people should actually fit, I think, with the team and the team leader, etc. So the sort of things that the HR should be doing is making sure we understand what behaviors we want in the organization and making it clear in a way of deploying that, understanding the competencies that we need. And unfortunately, we focus far too much on the day job competency, whereas we should be focusing not just on that, but on the improvement competency and the culture change competencies as well. So doing that. Performance guidelines. So how do we, performance management, reward, promote, succession plan, etc. Yes, that's an important role, but it's not the annual appraisal. I mean, how many of the listeners here dread the annual appraisal, either doing it or having it done to them? And how many people do 90% of what they're supposed to do in the week before the appraisal or the few days afterwards, and then the rest it just gets put in the drawer? It's fundamentally a broken system.
Yeah, it's a tick and flick exercise and gets lost most of the time.
So sorry, just a bit more. So hence the performance management needs to be much more coaching and development. So the coaching and development needs to be led, so that HR need to do a much better job in transferring the skills and the knowledge and the competence and the need for the competence to the individual. And hence we can then think about the flows. So the flow of the individual is the learning and development. How do we increase the level of knowledge and competency and confidence? The personal behavior, how do we improve our personal behavior? How to improve their listening, their accountability, their recognition of themselves and others? How do we improve their ability to coach and provide social support and receive social support? How do we improve their ability to create community inclusion for maybe diversity or disadvantaged people, etc.? And how do we work with them to improve the mental and physical well-being? So those are the sort of flows that I think we need to work on. And all of that is about creating these highly engaged people that will achieve, I think, maybe twice as much in terms of productivity or successful output, will feel a lot better. So it's almost like if we think of the Maslow hierarchy, many of us are familiar with, it's almost like saying we need to take away those things at the bottom. We need to create that sort of safe environment, decent pay. So safety, not just in terms of wild animals type safety, but psychological safety, so mental and physical safety. And hence we can then work with people so that they can achieve their own goals, their own purpose, and their own career, etc., which is their self-actualization. So if we can get to that, get rid of the bottom bits in Maslow as worries, so we can work on the higher level, then we can get people in the flow and produce this huge breakthrough, which I think the benefits of this can be as big or bigger than the whole lean stuff in the first place, or agile stuff in the first place.
I think, Peter, you're onto something amazing here, because in Australia recently, a number of human resource management departments have started to shift their name to people and culture departments, because I think they realize the gap and they want to truly become that business partner to help an organization move forward and grow. And what you've got here, Peter, is an approach to get together cross-functionally, and I guess in a way like value stream mapping, map an employee's journey on their current state and look for constraints and look for experiential challenges and look for ways to enhance flow together, and then implement that in a pull-based system, because you've got the business pulling it, not people in culture or HR sitting back thinking, what does the business need?
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of, I'm not sure whether tension is the right word, but there's going to be a little bit of a matrix here, because the two goals here are the goals of the organization, which is pulled by the needs of the team, and the goals of the individual. So instead of it being the goals of HR, it's the goals of the individual. So what do I want to get out of in my career? But if you actually create these employee journeys, you actually do work with them at the beginning of their career, and then this is what you update maybe on a quarterly or yearly basis, etc. Where am I on my career journey? What was my aspiration? What do I want to achieve? What am I working on? How am I going to get there? So and that may not completely align, because not everyone can be the boss in the company. So maybe it's not realistic to have 300 presidents in the organization. So we've got to think about working with people on these aspirations. But a lot of what people want in the aspirations is a feeling of we could say purpose or something. So I have contributed something to this organization. So maybe the word purpose, meaning might be another word. So creating meaning for me. So it's not just I'm coming in to make some purchase orders, but I actually want to achieve something. I want some goals. And actually, a lot of this is about creating this intrinsic motivation, whereas I think traditional management has worked with extrinsic motivation, and here's some bonuses, etc., which I don't think particularly work well, or if it does work well, it only works for a short time. I think the trick to creating engagement is creating the environment where you can foster this intrinsic motivation. Now, clearly, different individuals will have different potential for intrinsic motivation, and we understand that. But and some roles might be more difficult to do that. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't work on that. And I think that's what we should be trying to do.
Wow, but it sounds really impressive. Like I can envisage organizations coming together cross-functionally and focusing on the value stream the person goes through, mapping the employee journey, and finding ways to enhance it. And that will ultimately drive improvement for the culture and improvement for the business performance.
Yeah, I mean that's basically the idea of that. So there's a very small number of organizations that have started to sort of think in this way. And I did a LinkedIn search, and actually I found one organization in the world who actually uses the term people value stream, and they actually officially manage the people value stream, which is Lloyds Bank, one big UK bank.
Oh, nice.
They actually are officially doing it, and it's within an agile program.
Oh, good on them. That's awesome.
So,
Peter, what's next for the research? Where are you taking it now, moving forward?
Well, obviously within the people value stream, we developed this overview, and I'm doing a lot of work, particularly with my colleague Cheryl Jekyll in Chicago. I think you've had on one of your sessions.
Had Cheryl on earlier.
And what we're looking to do is with her, much more HR background than I am. We're trying to sort of fiddle with the model and actually make it a little bit more HR friendly, because at the moment it's probably quite lean friendly, but a lot of the terms won't necessarily work with the HR professionals. So we're trying to sort of create something that was a little bit more HR friendly. And then the next thing is actually going into the different elements, because we now need to sort of lift the lid off and do the deep dive. So we need to go into the different flows. We need to go into the different areas of HR. We need to go into how do you create pull-based learning, etc. So the first of those that I'm working on is the mental and physical well-being flow. So at the moment, doing a great deal of work on that particular flow, which I think is particularly apt in the current COVID years.
Yeah.
And I think it is years, not months, unfortunately.
Yes.
Where clearly the mental health has been highlighted as a major issue for a lot of people, particularly younger people, etc. So looking at how do we create that support for that mental and physical well-being. And what I found by looking at that is you can't split those, that actually mental issues quite often lead to physical, and physical quite often lead to mental. So it's actually sort of quite linked together. So actually understanding that flow, and what's quite interesting is doing research in that, and certainly looking at literature, it takes you into all sorts of weird and wonderful places. The literature's coming out, the medical profession and ergonomics and psychology and so forth. And what you find from this is that these literatures, although in many cases are quite well established, are just unheard of in certainly the lean world and generally in the management world, because they're often seen as some little subset in a not important thing like occupational health and safety, which is often seen as some little compliance thing. As long as we do the minimum, we'll be fine, without understanding that actually, if you can, to unlock people, create this flow, things like mental and physical health, if you don't create the right support there, you won't be, ticking off those bottom levels of the Maslow, because you'll be those hygiene factors. If I'm coming into work and I'm feeling stressed, I'm not going to give of my best, even if I want to. So how can we find a way to reduce the stress? And if I'm stressed, I might have an accident. So it's all a sort of vicious circle and so forth.
Peter, it's amazing to hearing you talk there about the foundation element of quality and safety again, because I know you and I have spoken in the past about the foundation of quality and process and safety from an operational excellence point of view. Like, without a foundation of quality and safety, you're building improvement on quicksand. But it sounds like you're finding the same from a people value stream point of view, that without mental and physical safety, that's a foundational element here.
I think it absolutely is. So that's the one we're looking at first, and obviously over time we'll look at the other flows and the other areas. But I foresee this is not going to be the next couple of months. This is going to be quite a long time to do this work. So,
but the outcomes for people and for organisations, Peter, will be amazing, because you're bringing together those two parts of human resources and people, and also the techniques of excellence that we've known through operational excellence and other areas, and agile, lean for so long.
Well, I think there's a lot in it, but time will tell, I guess, on that one.
Yeah. Peter, we're now running Enterprise Excellence 2-minute tips for those people that are time poor. For a leader or someone new just looking to know a bit more about people value stream, what would be the 2-minute tip you'd give them on the topic?
That's an interesting one. I think probably it's the same idea that many years ago we talked about with lean, which was pin an order on your back and walk yourself through the system. It's almost pin sort of a career on your back and walk your way through the system. So for instance, pretend you're a new recruit and actually see how easy it is, and see how welcoming, and see whether the systems are actually in place. And I suppose on that, you could almost take this sort of moment of truth. So when you come in the door, when this happens, does it just work or does it not work? So actually that sort of think about the flow, think about the new, employee or the new graduate coming in, and think what they're going to face, and think about that flow, which will help you to then think about this sort of employee journeys and so forth. I suppose that's the sort of thing I would focus on.
That's a great 2-minute tip for a people value stream, Peter. Thank you for that. That really makes a lot of sense. It's the whole go and be the journey yourself as that new recruit. Yeah, that'd be impressive. You'd learn. Peter, what's been something you've learned recently through this journey that you didn't know before? Like, what's been a recent insight for you on this topic or other?
Well, I suppose, I've always known the people bit was important, but the more I get into it, even more important that I actually find it to be, which is interesting. And obviously, I've learned a lot by looking at some of these different literatures and so forth. But I suppose one of the revolutions for me was this sort of link with agile. We've talked about it, in the past with obviously your work, etc. But looking at some of this with something of that agile mindset has certainly enlightened me in terms of some of the things that are offered by some of that community, as well as some of the gaps. You look at it and think, why haven't you done this? And there's some obvious things you think they ought to have been working on and they haven't. Which I guess for me, the interesting thing is working at the edges of discipline or an area and combining others is what I find fascinating. So lean and agile, lean and HR, and separate to this, I'm doing quite a bit of work on the other side, which is looking at the sort of lean with digitization, Industry 4.0, and then obviously you're coming across, these engineers and computer scientists who, well, that's a whole nother link of languages and so forth. I just can't imagine a computer science and HR professional in the same room. That just wouldn't work at all.
Too true.
But I suppose those are some of the areas that,
Oh, well, Peter, I really value it because I have to say for myself, the epitome of work and excellence is the work you do and the work of Jeff Sutherland. Like, to me, the two people I look up to most are yourself and Jeff Sutherland, which is agile, and then all the work you've done through people and lean and sustainable excellence. Peter, how can people reach out to you and learn more about the people value stream work that you're doing, or other topics on, intelligence in operational excellence and these other fields you're working on?
Well, number of ways. So one, you might want to contact me through my my LinkedIn profile. I actually have 4, but if you go to the Peter Hines with 4 dots at the end, that's the current one I'm using. The other thing you can do is Cheryl and I, we've created a website, which is www.peoplevaluestream.com. And that's something we put together as a sort of not-for-profit venture, which is around trying to encourage research in this area. So this could be our research or others' research, etc. It's also about dissemination and learning in this area. So it's sort of like we're trying to create a sort of portal there where we can help and translate some of this learning. So within that, and if you go there, one of the things we've done is create a virtual network with this. So we got people from different countries. We come together once a month to share knowledge and ideas. And in the future, we're going to be developing a few courses and so forth, which people can come along to there as well.
Oh, that's great, Peter. Well, Peter, thank you again for everything you're doing to help us create a better future, especially for employees and people. We all spend so much time at work. So this people value stream piece just seems amazing. And I really appreciate your time and knowledge again, Peter.
Great. All right. Well, nice to see you again, Brad. And good luck there in coming up to winter.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Talk soon.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Bye now.
The 2 key takeaways for me from this episode were the power of focusing on the people value stream, the employee journey, and secondly, the foundation of mental and physical wellness. The first key takeaway for me is that employees are critical to an organization's success. We focus so heavily on improving the value stream for our products and services we make, but often the journey of employees making them is broken, lacks flow, delivers low value. Peter's approach with the people value stream gets an organisation cross-functionally working together to make this important journey visible, identify challenges, breaks in flow, and potential experience improvement areas. Enhance your employees' journey and they will enhance your customers. The second key takeaway for me is the foundation physical and mental wellness plays for an employee's journey, which is so similar to the importance of quality and safety for an operational excellence journey. By improving the systems and culture to create a foundation of physical and mental safety, a platform is created to build and improve the rest of an employee's journey. Thanks again for your time and knowledge, Peter. Talk soon. Bye for now.